Well, Simon, this, as I mentioned earlier, I am off to the cinema in a short while to go and watch Furiosa with a pizza and a couple of beers, which probably leads us quite well to our intermission where we talk about cinema experience.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's intermission time.
During the week, there was a really interesting interview that was done with the website Collider, where the two guys who are largely in charge of IMAX were talking about their plans for the next 6 years. So,
Wow.
what they are discussing is that IMAX largely is a format that's used in the US, but they don't really have a massive global footprint. They certainly have IMAX equipped cinemas around the world, but it's never been like their primary sort of business objective to be a global player. But they're wanting to change that. IMAX obviously have the biggest screens. It's got a very specific camera that needs to be used to film content for screens of that size. Christopher Nolan's really the only filmmaker to really just embrace IMAX in the biggest possible way. Where for the last few films he's done, there's been short little segments where from, I think, The Dark Knight onwards, he'd film like the big action sequences in IMAX. And then if you're watching The Dark Knight on Blu-ray at home, you'll see that the screen size actually changes on your TV because some bits of the IMAX sequences, other
I'll
bits
never forget the way the Dark Knight popped out into that bigger IMAX imagery when we saw it at the IMAX screen. That was amazing. So yeah, I'm all for that.
Yeah. So he's been like the filmmaker who's really been into it. And Oppenheimer, I think, is the first film he made fully in IMAX. And IMAX lent really heavily into that and made a large amount of money for Mr. Nolan and the Oppenheimer film. But they are looking at expanding out globally. And part of what they talk about in this interview is that the Australian market, which is where you and I are located right now, Simon, right now, we've got 2 IMAX theaters in Australia. You've got the Melbourne cinema, you've got the Sydney cinema. Back in the day, they had an IMAX in Brisbane, but that folded 25 years ago, thereabouts. Wow. It's been some time. The screen still exists. Okay, it's actually now at this sort of discount cinema in South Bank in Brisbane. So the screen size is still there, but they just screen regular movies and blow up the image to that size. It's gross. Anyway, Simon. Well, the resolution's not quite there to support it. Like, people are like, oh, let's go see it on the bigger screen. And it's like, well, what are you really seeing, people?
Well, that's good, because I'm all for IMAX. You know my love of the big screen image and the fully immersive movie-going experience.
Yeah, sorry, Simon, I didn't actually drop the fact, which was, as part of the rollout, they want to launch 39 IMAX theaters across Australia. So when they talk about this, this isn't just like in Sydney where they've just reopened an IMAX. It'll be a large dedicated venue for it. But what they're doing is talking to cinema exhibitors across Australia. So it'll be very similar to what they do in the US, which is that you go into, hypothetically, your Hoyts theater, and that Hoyts theater is equipped with a IMAX screen in there. Okay, so essentially what they would probably be doing...
This worries me a little bit, because IMAX, the brand, is synonymous with the biggest movie-going experience possible. Are they going to be building these giant screens?
So here's... And look, I'm not an expert in this at all, okay? But my understanding of IMAX, based on just general conversations I've seen over the place over the the years, is that there'll be some cinemas in the US that purport to have an IMAX screen. But when I talk about IMAX, it's actually probably not that much more impressive than the VMAX screens that we hear in Australia.
So, like the brand.
That's a bit of a concern. I'd like to see a bigger screen size than VMAX, which... Look, VMAX is a very large, exciting cinema experience, okay? But if I'm lured with the promise of IMAX, I want to see something in line with what that Sydney cinema experience is, or Melbourne, which are similar-ish screen sizes, but Melbourne's a little bit bigger.
I love carrots, but when I go to Idaho, I want a potato.
Yes, I guess. Sure. But anyway, so Simon...
with this...
Yeah, go for it.
In this intermission, we're going to be looking at... What our most memorable movie-going experiences are, the kind of cinematic experience, projection-wise or theater-wise, auditorium-wise, that we like?
Yeah, largely. So, like, what sort of cinema experiences do we like? So, look, across Australia in mainstream sort of theatres, you've got 2 chains that dominate Australia. You've got Hoyts, you've got event. Within those, you've got standard cinema screens, you've got the VMAX screens, which are the big ones with the comfy chairs. You've got
Or extreme
the
screen in the Hoyts people. Yep.
yeah, well, yeah, we'll get to that. But you got like 40X theaters, and you've got different types of theaters. And so, Simon, on the rare occasion that you're seeing a movie that you haven't been, you're not shilling for the, big cinema because they've given you free tickets to go along and see something. When you're
Sure.
paying your like $1.50 you pay as a film critic to go and see something on a big screen, like what sort of experience are you looking for when you load up a website thinking, hey, I'd like to go and see Furiosa at the cinema. What am I
Okay.
off to see? Where am I going to go see it?
All right. First and foremost, we've mentioned it many times over, I'm a big fan of IMAX, as you know. I'll be looking at a film later in the podcast that I saw this week in IMAX and loved in IMAX that I probably wouldn't have loved on a smaller screen. So bigger is better as far as I'm concerned in the world of cinema projection, the world of movie watching. With that in mind, I have very fond memories of going to a screening of a Cinerama film. This was back in the 70s. They would have synchronized 35 millimeter projectors on 3 huge curved screens that take up sort of a 146-degree arc, and they used to show roller coaster rides and flights over the Grand Canyon. Cinerama came out in I want to say the early 60s. Films like The Robe and Ben-Hur were presented. Definitely The Robe, maybe not Ben-Hur, but it was another way of fighting TV at the time. Make it bigger, make it better. That's why 70 millimeter films are so important. You haven't seen Lawrence of Arabia until you've seen on 70 millimeter, and the Randwick Ritz here in Sydney, and I think also the Hayden Cremorne Orpheum has a 70 millimeter projector capability. So they're beautiful ways to watch movies. Then at the other end, there's a couple of cinemas around Australia through the Hoyts chain, which are these Onyx cinema screens. Now, I've only seen one film in Onyx, and that was the Jason Statham film, The Beekeeper. So indulge me this, but a Samsung Onyx screen is backed by LED, like brilliant picture quality, and it's this beautiful use of high dynamic range graphics and very clear sounds. It's got really deep blacks, really bold colors that pop out. And I think Onyx is a great way to watch a movie. I look for that when I go to the movies. For me,
Can I talk about Onyx for a moment? So
yeah, please.
yeah, Onyx, and there aren't many of them in Australia. Like I know that there's one at Hoyt's Entertainment Quarter in Sydney.
Yeah, that's where I saw Beekeeper, and there's one at High Point, Hoyt's High Point. I'm not sure
okay.
what it is.
I guess maybe that's the only two. I know it's a really expensive screen. I've seen a couple of films on that Onyx screen at the Entertainment Quarter, and I've actually been really disappointed by that experience regularly, which is that, like the last one I saw there was during the middle of COVID. I remember seeing The Exorcist being played on that screen.
Right.
That was a fun screening because I was the only person there, as it was mid-COVID.
I was the only person at the Beekeeper too. I don't know why they put these, and it was like in the last week of the film's release, so I don't know why Onyx isn't a bigger deal for them, but...
Yeah, well, the actual experience of watching Onyx, though, essentially you pay your money, you go into the theater, you've bought it online, so you don't have to talk to another human being, which is my preferred way of dealing with anything. Walk into this large auditorium, you sit there, you sit in the theater, you hope no one else turns up, then no one does, and then you watch up on the screen as it starts. And I got a few minutes in where I was really interested in the technology, so I was looking at, again, The Exorcist, but I remember seeing a couple of other things in there as well. But I remember looking for like the darkness of the screen and seeing how like a black appears on there. Because when you're watching something projected, the blacks, it's a weird way to phrase things, but like the blacks on a screen aren't really such an issue. But when it's on a TV type screen, TV screens don't really necessarily always show black as being just sort of black. Sometimes that weird sort of blobby type images on screen. But the Onyx, like the blacks look amazing. But that's beautiful. Ultimately the thing. You are watching just a very large TV screen. And while I'm regularly talking about like the fact that people's TV screens at home are getting bigger, and for a lot of people they're seeing very, a reduced need to go to the cinema because they've got such a good cinema experience at home, I think there's one thing to watch a TV screen at home. There's another thing to go and pay really good money to see a TV experience in a cinema.
Yeah,
that's two different things.
I know. I can see that by definition. I was a little bit surprised at how much I loved Onyx and really took to Onyx because I'm very much a fan of seeing the scratchy prints, the seeing the original sort of deep dark blacks that come through with film projection. But I kind of really dug the way that it was a brilliant picture quality on the Onyx screen. So yeah, it's going to divide people. You and I saw the D box session or the 4DX session where when we saw Venom and we had water spat in our face and we had steam shot up our trousers and all those sort of things. That was gimmicky and that was kitschy. I've never been back to a 4DX screening after that. Have you?
I've seen several things in 4DX. So
Oh, really?
4DX is basically a way of taking a movie and turning it into a theme park ride. So you've got the chairs on hydraulics. So chair moves around and, it's all synced with, whatever's happening. So to talk about the film Venom, for example, that film's in San Francisco. So obviously there was a car chase scene in it. So when the cars are going up over the hills, like your chair goes up over the hills. And, you kind of feel that when Venom's there with like goo coming out of his mouth, like you feel drops of water coming from the ceiling down onto you. When, a car exhaust is happening nearby, like, smoke sort of, in your face. So it's a full sort of immersive experience, or as immersive as you can get with this kind of a thing. It's no Megalopolis immersion, but, it's still pretty immersive.
I would point the two things.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, so you've got that. Yeah. So you said we saw Venom there. Venom is the perfect movie to see in 4DX because it is not there to, really, it's big, dumb fun, which is not necessarily a good movie. Okay, so if you've got no sort of desire to see cinema, okay, regardless how silly that cinema may be at times, if you don't want to watch cinema and you want to have a fun time at a movie, absolutely go to a 4DX. You will have a really fun time, but don't go and see something good. Go and pick something that's a bit trashy and a bit silly, and you'll have a great time with it. Just to shout out to Christopher Nolan, I did see as one of my many screenings of Tenet at the cinemas, I saw Tenet in the 4DX, which is exactly how Christopher Nolan wanted me to see it.
Yeah, exactly. I am going to put a red line through the sensation of outdoor cinemas, things like moonlight movies or watching films on the harbour. These are not ways to watch movies. These are ways to go and people watch. You get to see idiots sit with picnic blankets, sipping Chardonnay, checking their phones and talking through the whole film. Do not watch a movie at an outdoor cinema if you want to watch a movie. The exception that proves that rule is a screening of the Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers classic Top Hat that I saw in New York City, projected onto the largest exterior wall of the New York Public Library. And I'll never forget that. That was an extraordinary experience. But in every other regard, every time I've ever been to a St. George Open Air Cinema or midnight or moonlight movies or anything like that, it has pretty much led me to yelling at people to shut up and just watch the film. And then I had to realize that I was the one being an idiot because nobody was there to watch the film.
Yeah, that's it. You're not going to see a movie. You're there for the event aspect of it with those outdoor screenings, which...
Drive-ins, Dan Banyan. Drive-ins, Dan Barrett.
Look, I'm very fond of the drive-in.
Are you a fan?
Yeah, I quite like it. There's different reasons people go to a drive-in. The appeal these days for me as a, well and truly long married man in my middle age is probably quite different to when I was going to the drive-in as a younger person.
Sure.
But I think they're a grand time. It depends. Again, I wouldn't go and see a movie that I am super excited. Like, I wouldn't go and see Furiosa at the drive-in. Okay, only because you're watching that for
to watch The English Patient or anything like that at the drive-in, are you?
Yeah.
You're there to have a fun time, walk into the candy bar and have a bit of fun there and watch the movie out. So, yeah, I enjoy the drive-in experience for the nostalgia, the sense of fun. But, yeah, you're right. Once again, you're not there to fully embrace the movie itself.
Yeah, also, I will say the last couple of times I've been to the drive-in and... Yeah, so it's been a couple of years since I've been to a drive-in in retrospect, but the last time I was there was during COVID. I can tell you it was the 17th of June, 2020, because it was my birthday and I wanted to do something on my birthday, but we were all locked down and couldn't do anything because of that stupid virus. But the Blacktown Drive-In in Sydney was playing the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which was a fantastic thing for me to go and do because I'd seen the film a few times by that point. So it wasn't like I was seeing it for the first time up on that big screen. But like,
Yeah.
there was no other thing for me to do other than go to a drive-in, and it was fantastic. It was probably my best birthday ever. But before then, like maybe about like half a year before then, there was a screening at that same cinema of American Graffiti, which I had a
Wow.
really great time with because all the cars came along with like the 1950s cars, and people were showing that
Yeah.
off. So again, that was an experiential thing rather than being there for the movie. But maybe that's the strength of the drive-in. Maybe the best things to see there aren't the new movies, even though I've got a lot of fond memories as a kid going to the drive-in with my parents. It's maybe not see the new movies as much as it is to, revisit old classics and just have like a fun
Totally agree.
time celebrating cinema culture rather than necessarily the movie itself.
Totally agree. 2 weeks ago at this Mad Max screening, we had all the rev heads turn up in their Mad Max inspired cars. And it was a great experience just to have that community together, and that's I think that's what driving is all about. And as we record this in a couple of days' time, I'm showing Weird Science, the John Hughes comedy with Kelly LeBrock as part of our retro cinemas at the retro screenings at the drive-in. So I'm having fun with the drive-in screenings this year.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm a bit
yeah,
annoyed I can't get
and the
along to
first
that.
movie I ever saw, the first movie I ever saw was Disney's Peter Pan, at the North Ride Drive-In, which I know I've mentioned previously on the podcast, but it holds a very special place in my heart, the drive-in experience. So lots
Yeah.
of wonderful, fun ways to watch movies. 3D is another one that I don't really care for unless it's done to the degree that Cameron does in the Avatar films, and it's a whole other thing. But otherwise, it's a little too gimmicky. It's kind of the 4DX is the new high tech version of 3D as far as I'm concerned. So,
Yeah.
but
No,
you
most
you
of the
can
3D
enjoy the
stuff's
3Ds.
most of the 3D stuff's pretty silly, except for obviously my Lord and Master James Cameron with his, cinematic masterpieces, the Avatar films. But
Exactly right.
the thing I maybe wanted to sort of have a bit of conversation point in this is
Yeah.
when to bring it back to the initial question I asked you, which was what is the idealized cinema experience? And you kind of said IMAX, but you never really quite answered my question. When I'm
Sure.
thinking about what movie am I going to go and see, for the last, bunch of years, this would be my decision-making process. I usually go and see movies on like the opening week that they're out. So I'll go along
Yes.
on, Thursday night or a Saturday morning or whatever it is. I will look for the biggest possible screen, the comfiest chairs, like with that experience. So it's always a
Sure.
VMAX experience for me. Okay. And then it's just a matter of working out, like, which is probably the more comfortable cinema. So I kind of like
Well, what are you doing
the,
with Furiosa? Aren't you doing
well,
Furiosa like in a high
okay, well,
chair with
just
pizza or something?
hold tight, Simon. We're getting started in a second. So
Okay.
as I said, for the last couple of years, this has been my thinking, which was I'd look for that experience. And usually Carindale VMAX is, I think, probably the best one in Brisbane, but the Chermside one's pretty good as well.
Sure.
In Sydney, it's the Hurstville VMAX is the best of the VMAXs, but that's neither here nor there. Something's changed in the last 7 or 8 months in my cinema going, which is that in Brisbane, they've opened up an Angelica theatre. Angelica is a chain in the US which they specialize very much to the cineast and have a very grown up experience where it's the sort of thing where you can go and get a beer while you're watching a movie. So they've opened up an Angelica here. It's being run through the Reading Cinema crowd. And Reading is a suburban sort of cheapish experience cinema. So them doing Angelica is actually a pretty big deal. And I'm hoping they roll out more across Australia because what they've done with this theatre, it's a really fun, good sort of urban cinema experience. It's a strong mix
Mhm.
of art house releases, retro screenings, and then also like the big couple of movies every
It
week.
was a big deal that they got the Angelica contract. That was a big name to be for Reading to
Yeah.
be in bed with.
Yeah, and they've barely promoted it. Like, people don't know the cinema exists in Brisbane, which is great because I can go there and rest assured that there's not going to be too many people there, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. But it's now become my cinema go-to of choice because while I would always usually used to preference the largest possible screen I could get to, what works about the Angelica cinema is I put a lot of thought, it seems, into screen size to chair location Okay, and when your chair is positioned in a way which is far enough away from the screen where you're not right up against it, but also is from both a height and distance perspective actually perfectly aligned with that screen, it doesn't matter how
Yep.
big that screen gets. It's really just a very comfortable, great way to watch a movie. When I sit in that cinema tonight and watch Furiosa up on the big screen, I'm not going to be too bothered by the fact that it is a smaller screen because that ratio is actually just really, really spot on. And
I
so
get that. Yep,
yeah, and so
understand.
this has become my go-to cinema experience now, the Angelica. Where I have the internal dilemma is that their standard theaters probably sit like, I'm going to say 80, 85 people, maybe thereabouts. So it's a, standard sort of smallish cinema kind of experience. But they also have like their gold class style things where you can get food delivered to your chairs. And that kind of
Well,
experience
look,
generally annoys me. I don't like sitting there being interrupted by someone coming through, dropping off like a plate of nachos for someone to,
I tell
nosh
you what,
on.
if you're eating movie theater pizza, you'll be having an internal dilemma. I don't know how sort of standard how good the restaurants are, the kitchen facilities there. Do they just whack it in a microwave and nuke it?
Look, I will
Still a bit
say
fun.
the Angelica actually do a pretty good pizza because I had one a
Good.
couple of months ago for the Godzilla versus Kong film. And Furiosa, I didn't really choose this session tonight, but I am in one of those sort of smaller gold classy type cinemas, which as an Angelica member is all of $16, which is fantastic. So not only will
Nice.
it be some of the best seats that you'll sit in Brisbane, but also, for $16, which that's fantastic. And like regular tickets are like
That's a good night
$20.
out.
Yeah.
That is
Good
a
night
good
out. So
night
anyway,
out.
Angelica
All right.
Theatre, definitely my preferred experience at the moment.
Yeah, look, very quickly, I'll wrap this up in answer to your question. The very last row of the front section of the cinema, usually somewhere around the middle of that row. So I'm about a third of the way up the screen, so I have to look up to get the full cinema experience. But I have full. It takes up my entire field of vision. That is my preferred seating, and it's a VMAX or an extreme screen for me, unless it's one of the something like as Priscilla recently I saw on the smaller sort of Palace Cinema, which I'm fine with. It's but yeah, extreme screen VMAX, middle seat, a third of the way up from the front of the cinema. There you go. That would have
Yeah.
been a very quick intermission if I just said that at the start.
It really would have been. Can I just say the most uncomfortable seats in Brisbane are the
Yeah,
Dendy Cooperoo Cinema. Boy, I
yeah,
struggle with that place. Leg room's not great. Seats themselves not
yeah.
comfortable. Just yeah, shocking cinema fit out. The one thing we haven't really mentioned is some of the really great retro cinemas that exist around the
Oh,
place.
sure.
So obviously, while seeing a film in like the best possible screening formats and environments is always preferred, there are still some really really great retrospective theaters around, which I think do a fantastic job. And I'm more than willing to sit in a fairly sort of shitty theaterette while watching like a great bit of cinema that I've got a lot of fondness for.
Yeah.
What's your favorite in Sydney? A lot of people would probably look to the Orpheum.
Not so much the Orpheum. I'd go out to the Randwick Ritz, which I've
Yeah,
always found hard to say. The Randwick Ritz to see
that's my
the retro
preference.
stuff. Um, they have a great lineup of film festivals and retro screenings, and they're always having retro screenings there. Sydney's in need of a really big Astor style because the Astor that Zach runs down in Melbourne, Cinema Nova do a great job in Melbourne. Melbourne's got a much richer retro cinema going culture than Sydney has, and
But
I
it's
miss that
those
in Sydney.
it's the Astor guys that bought the Randwick Ritz a few years ago, and I know they had
Yeah,
some development plans for that cinema, so I don't know if that's happened
not sure
since
he
I've been
has
gone.
either. So. All right, that's good. We're
Hmm,
done. Intermission over.
done.